All right, guys, we have a full-blown political heist happening here, and it is unfolding right before our eyes, at least on this channel, because it seems as though nobody else wants to tell the truth here. So this is how we're going to frame this. Governor Maura Healey has initiated a move to seize St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. This property was once part of a $1.25 billion real estate portfolio that was sold back in 2016. And if I were to pin a conservative value on this, I would say it's around $200 million. Okay? Here's how it goes. Here's what's happening. Healey wants to buy this property for $4.5 million. That is barely 2% of its estimated value. And by the way, it's even less than what they pay in property taxes because this property is assessed at somewhere in the vicinity of like $220 million. So if this is not one of the biggest lowball offers I've ever seen in history, I do not know what is. But of course, there is more to this story. All right. And here's where it gets murky. Rather than, let's say, keeping this property under state management, she's intending on transferring control over to Boston Medical Center. And guess what? The former employer of Boston Medical Center is her current health secretary, Kate Walsh. Yes. So this is where it gets even stranger, because I think that with a property like this, shouldn't there have been a public bidding process here? So I went and I did a deep dive into this, right? And first of all, when you really think about this, this is a matter of taxpayer fairness, because when you have public money and the state authorities are using it to seize and redistribute a private asset, I would think that the citizens deserve assurance that they're getting the highest return on their money's investment. You know, not just in, let's say, dollars here, but in long-term healthcare impact. Second of all, eminent domain. Let's talk about this for a minute here. This is like the last option, okay? This is like the last option under these regards, okay? But I believe this was deliberate. And I also think it's a controversial choice by the Healey administration, because even though the hospital, the collapse of Steward Healthcare, this did create a public health crisis, I don't think the state had to seize St. Elizabeth's Medical Center through like such aggressive legal mechanisms as eminent domain. Again, this is something reserved. It's like a last resort, okay? There are other avenues they could have taken. They could have negotiated the sale. They could have had a temporary receivership or a transparent transfer of operations with some legislative and community oversight. But instead, the administration invoked a public health emergency. This is very important, because the reason they did this is to justify a fast-track seizure at a deeply discounted price, which in turn bypassed public bidding, by the way, and the transparency. At least this is what happened in my opinion. Again, eminent domain is usually a last resort. It's a last resort effort. But under the circumstances that they created, that they generated, it really looks to me like it was a strategic move to gain control of a high-value property at a discounted price. And I find this to be quite the convenient circumstances that they created. That's what I think. And honestly, think bigger picture here. Because if the state can quietly seize a $200 million property and hand it off without any levels of scrutiny or, let's say, decent journalistic reporting, what's to stop similar moves in the future? Because without open bidding, there's no way to gauge market interest or confirm that BMC was truly their best option. You see what I'm saying here? It's ridiculous to me. Other potential buyers, like they may have offered a better deal for the property, or maybe there could have been a more innovative healthcare solution that decided to move in there. We'll never know. The public will never know because they were never given a chance to compete. Again, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. All right. I know I went on a tangent there, but I want to explain a little bit about how we got here. So I'm going to rewind for a second here and catch my breath, right? So here's how it goes. This is how this happened. This is how this all got started because Maura Healey and her administration aren't the only bad actors here. Steward Healthcare, this place was like a ticking time bomb, and it was created by Cerberus Capital Management in 2010. Then in 2016, that's when they pulled the classic private equity move, which was to sell the hospital and the real estate to a company. It was a Medical Properties Trust for $1.25 billion. But then what they did is they leased it back at an unsustainable rent. And that cash did not go back into patient care. What ended up happening is it funded the expansion of whatever their, network was. It also expanded executive payouts and bonuses, right? Of course. So again, they are bad actors in this too. But the problem is, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind, right? You know that saying. Now, from what I've read, right? And maybe some of you work there, maybe some of you could provide some context to this, but apparently a lot of the medical equipment that was there, maybe it was leased or whatever, it went unpaid, the staff was slashed, patients were neglected, and even there was a case where one mother at St. Elizabeth's literally died, unfortunately, after giving childbirth because a life-saving device had been repossessed earlier during the week, right? So again, we're dealing with a few bad actors here, but let this sink in, okay? And now Steward CEO, his name is Ralph De La Torre. This guy made out like a freaking bandit, okay? Because, he sold his stake. This guy, he moves down to Florida and he ended up dodging a Senate subpoena in 2024. Congress ended up holding him in contempt, and the Department of Justice is still, I believe now, trying to investigate Steward for fraud, for bribery, and for some levels of corruption here. This is like, let's say, Enron with stethoscopes, basically. But here's where things went from, let's say, disgraceful to disgusting or disturbing, right? So in 2024, this is when Governor Maura Healey invoked, and again, I wanted you to remember this, the public health emergency. And this is when they seized St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Brighton, again, offering just $4.5 million for the hospital property, worth somewhere of $200 million. So then what followed was this. Apollo Global Management, they were the property's landlord. What they ended up doing was, and this is really crazy and really important, they ended up filing a lawsuit, and they called this move unconstitutional, and to some extent, I think that it is. And what ended up happening was Healey took this prized asset and handed it to Boston Medical Center, which again used to be run by Kate Walsh, who again is now the state health secretary. So how is that not unconstitutional when you don't, not that I want to rehash this, but when you don't have open bidding, there's no legislative role, there's no transparency, you're just handing it off from a government insider to her former institution. And BMC did not pay full price for this. They didn't win a property or this property in a bidding war. They were basically just given the keys. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't just, I forgot about this. It wasn't just St. Elizabeth, because BMC was also gifted Good Samaritan Medical Center in Brockton. Meanwhile, there were other hospitals that Steward owned. There was, what was it called? Kearney in Dorchester. And I believe the other one was Neshoba Valley in Ayer. And they were basically allowed to wither and rot, right? The state didn't want anything to do with them. But what the state did want is St. Elizabeth's and Good Samaritan. So what made them so special, right? Think about it like this. My opinion, location, value, connections. One is surrounded by Boston College and the relatively booming Allston-Brighton corridor. The other serves a densely populated, underserved area that I think could guarantee a flood of state reimbursements in the future. Mark my words. Now, it goes even deeper. Apollo claimed Boston is paying around $140 million if you combine both of the hospitals, which is still a ridiculously low valuation, okay? But for the taxpayers, I feel like this is somewhat of a scam here, all right? And for BMC, it's a windfall. Let's not pretend like it's anything else. This is like a surgical triage here, right? This is a targeted, let's say, consolidation, and it's still ongoing. And here's where it gets even more wild, because the new operators, including BMC, Lawrence General, and Brown University Health, are in a position where they're being shaken down by Steward itself, okay? Because even though Steward sold off these hospitals, guess what happened? They still regain controls of the IT systems and the medical records. So now what's happening is Steward, I think, feels like they got the, let's say, shit end of the deal here, right? Which I guess you could say they probably did. They took a monumental loss, but they're using that loss and the reason that they're retaining IT systems and medical records as leverage, and they're demanding millions upon millions of dollars each month from the state. And if they don't receive it, they are threatening to shut off critical services like billing, like labs, like radiology, unless that they are paid, okay? It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. So think about it this way. If those systems go dark, I would think patient care could stop. And the hospital CEOs, they've even said that there could be lives on the line here. So where's the state, right? Healey and Walsh aren't intervening financially, but they sure did move fast to lock down the assets. That's what I think. This isn't just a story about a greedy CEO or a failed healthcare system. This is about how your government behaves during a crisis. Instead of protecting patients and ensuring stability, it exploited the chaos, it found an opportunity, and guess what? It picked the winners and it picked the losers behind closed doors. So, bigger picture. And again, I've been thinking about this a lot. If they could do this to a $200 million property, what makes you think they can't do it to you or to yours? Really? And by the way, where's the media on this? Where are they? Could anybody find them? Most of them are running Healey's press releases like they're frickin' gospel. Healey, let's say Massachusetts governor saves hospital, right? Stuff like this. No one is asking why her health secretary's old employer was the main beneficiary. No one is digging into the extremely lowball price. No one is asking why other hospitals were left to rot. It's absolutely insane. So do not be fooled by the PR that we see in this state. It is absurd. This was not a rescue. It was a transfer of power disguised as a rescue. And really, unless we push back, guess what? The next emergency might be at your doorstep. Hell, it may even be at mine. God only knows. But guess what? I'm sure the news media will spin any story in the favor of the legislature any way that they can. Period. Hands down. All right, I made this long enough. That's it for today's video before I get more pissed off. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.